Hello ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar, which is brought to you by sharedserviceslink.com and sponsored by Habu. Today we're looking at a subject which I know is very key to a lot of shared services directors and accounts payable leaders and purchase to pay owners, which is looking at boosting first-time match rates. So we're looking at the CONSOL Energy story, where they've been deploying electronic invoicing and really been watching their first-time match rate go up to a very impressive 96%. So welcome to the webinar. My name is Susie West and I'm the founder and CEO at sharedserviceslink.com, and I'm your host for today. And I'm very pleased to be presenting as our speakers Rhinus Stridham, who's the Chief Marketing Officer at Habu, and Habu's client, CONSOL Energy. And I'm very pleased to say that from CONSOL Energy we have George Smith, who is the General Manager, Value Chain Materials and Supply Chain Management. So let's have a look at the agenda for the next 60 minutes. We'll be touching on the importance of questions and your role in this webinar today, touching on the context of this webinar, this discussion, and then we'll be moving into the actual subject matter itself. We'll be starting with an overview from Rhinus, and then I'll be interviewing George on his experience and CONSOL Energy's experience to getting to 96% first-time match rate. And then it's your turn, ladies and gentlemen, which is that you will be using this opportunity to get some answers that you're seeking. So how that works is the following. It's a very straightforward platform, and what I would like to ask you to do is to put your questions through to me, and I will be putting those questions through to our presenters, Rhinus and George, in the last 10 minutes of the webinar. So let's have a look at the context for this discussion today. First-time match rate, as we all know, is a really critical KPI. It's a chief barometer of the health of your purchase to pay process. It's very, very telling as far as the process efficiency is concerned, the controls within that process are concerned, the cost associated with that process is concerned, and also the productivity. So if you've got a high first-time match rate and it's 90% and above, then the chances are you've got very good controls, you've got a low cost per transaction, your productivity is nice and high, and the end-to-end efficiency is in very good shape. So the KPI of first-time match is really is one of the chief ones, because it really is very telling of the health of your P2P process. Now, we've known for the last few years that top-performing organizations are enjoying a first-time match rate of around 94–95%. And so I'm really pleased that today we are looking at a case study that can actually illustrate 96% first-time match rate. So it's great to be having CONSOL Energy with us today. So just before we kick off and I hand over to our first presenter, I'd just like to get a sense as to who we've got on the line today. So in terms of invoice volume, so just share with us, if you will, what volumes of invoices you receive each year. How many invoices do you receive into your shared services organization, your accounts payable organization per annum? Is it less than 100,000? 100,000 to $250,000, $250,000 to $500,000, $500,000 to $1 million, or over 1 million accounts payable purchase invoices each year? We like to get the responses up to around 70%. We're currently at 51%. So if you haven't already responded, can I suggest you do so? And I will be closing the polls shortly. We're at 57%. As I mentioned, I'd like to get it up to 70%. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at the results coming up on your screen. Now we're at 67% of you responding, so many thanks indeed for that. So a good kind of range, really. We're just shy of a third of you of less than 100,000. And interestingly, 16% of you with over 1 million invoices. So I think we've got a good range there, and I think what that tells us is that first-time match rate, purchase to pay, electronic invoicing is becoming more and more important to not just the large multinationals with really high volume, but also the mid-market as well, with between 20 to, say, 100,000 invoices per annum. So interesting results there. So now I'd like to introduce our first speaker of the day, Rinus Strydom, who is the Chief Marketing Officer at Hubwoo. Over to you, please, Rinus.
All right, Susie, thank you very much. Rinus Strydom here. I'm in charge of solution strategy and marketing for Hubwoo. I'm very pleased to be here today, along with Susie and George. So what we're going to cover here in the first couple of slides is what the market is telling us around the topics surrounding first-time invoice match and specifically getting procurement and finance to align. So the first point that we're seeing in our customer base is that whether companies start with either a spend compliance or an AP automation project, they can get stellar results in either of those. But at the end of the day, when you join them, that's when the maximum results, like the best-in-class ones CONSOL will share today, are possible. Second finding we see is that business networks can very easily be that link that joins those two projects, right? If you have the same electronic enablement of your supply chain for both the procurement and invoicing process, it makes that link very easy. And then the third finding is that this word social commerce, and we'll explain what that means a bit later. It's using what the best of what's working in the consumer space today and applying that to business. So moving on to getting procurement and finance to agree. As we all know, those departments typically have very different KPIs and measures. So when you do get to the point of joining these projects, what is the outcome? How do I measure it? Very importantly, whose budget and whose responsibility and resources are going to be involved? So we do realize that those are often the hardest challenges, but we do feel that best-in-class companies such as CONSOL have done that very well, so we'll cover that today. When we talk about the value of a network, so we talked about procurement and finance getting value out of it. It's not only procurement and finance, but it's also your supply chain. So the examples here are savings, such as savings and ROI, like CONSOL will cover today. The example of Schweitzer that you see here, that they are a seller on the business network by Hubwoo, and just by being on this network, they've been able to increase 2 million euros of upsell to existing customers, and that's by simply ingraining themselves in the buying process of their customers. So then you see some industry stats from an analyst here talking about how networks enable more spend under management. So what it is more electronic communication with the suppliers, more compliant spend that results in direct bottom line savings and a lot better supplier KPIs and responsiveness as well. And at the very bottom, we see here, this was an important study that McKinsey did of several hundred businesses, and they looked at the difference between businesses that are using networks to electronically enable their supply chain and businesses that are not using networks. And you can see here a significant difference in profit margins, revenue, and market share for those companies that are using electronic enablement. So, next, when we talk about the social commerce aspect of B2B, everybody's familiar with very point uses. Facebook is great for catching up with your cousins, and Yelp for finding restaurants with peer reviews, LinkedIn for keeping up with your professional colleagues. But there are now lots of those types of aspects that help both procurement and payables organizations as well. So the collaboration is really the key there. It's not the social aspect, it's really the collaboration of it. We'll cover a snapshot of specific value points towards the end. So back to you, Susie.
Thank you very much indeed, Rinus. So at this stage, I'd now have the honour of introducing George Smith, who is the General Manager of Value Chain Material and Supply Chain Management at CONSOL Energy, who's been involved in a number of improvements, P2P improvement projects at CONSOL Energy, which he's going to be talking about in the next few moments. So nice to have you with us, George.
Thank you very much, Susie. It's great to be here. I'm always glad that when I have a chance to tell CONSOL's story, because it's been such a great story. The partnering that we've had and what we've done with our cost containment, managed spend, and efficiencies to bring us to the point in business process excellence where we are today.
Great to have you with us. Thank you so much. So maybe, George, just before we go into the purchase to pay improvement story, you might just share with us a little bit of context. So tell us a little bit about CONSOL Energy.
Sure, no problem. The CONSOL Energy is actually a fairly old company. We were founded in 1860. We didn't start production until 1864. We're a $6.1 billion revenue company, which puts us up there in the Fortune 500 and the S&P 500 league. We're a gas and coal producer. One of the notable items here is that we have the largest private R&D facility in the United States, and we currently have over 9,000 employees. We have a...
Okay, good. And just talk us through...
All right.
So go on, George. You're going to tell us a little bit about your core values.
I apologize, Susie. Yes, our key core value is safety. With most companies, that's the case. When you're dealing with a industry such as ours in the gas and coal business, that definitely has to be our top core value. And then beyond the safety core value, we have compliance, continuous improvement, production, and cost. It's our view that if we follow the first three core values of safety, compliance, and continuous improvement, that production and cost will follow.
Okay, good. So let's now focus on the purchase to pay story. So if you can just go back a few years and just talk to us a little bit about what life looked like in your purchase to pay organization. What we're really trying to understand was kind of what your as-was situation looked like, and really what compelled you to start changing that environment.
Oh, definitely. You have to know where we started from to understand how much of an achievement this has been for us and how well these processes have worked. First of all, value was driven. It was one-sided. It was all essentially driving value for us and really not driving it out to our suppliers. We had high transactional volumes, high transactional costs, a lot of manipulations there for the transactions. We were using multiple system solutions at the time. Our gas division was using a different system than our coal division, than our R&D division, and so forth. A lot of the processes at some of these places were still paper-based, particularly the invoicing, which was almost entirely paper-based at the time. So we identified the potential areas that we wanted to target for improvement. Of course, accounts payable, accounts receivable, supply chain management, materials management, production management, etc. There was a broken chain, actually, of the procure-to-pay process because we were doing our end of the transaction, which was the procurement, and the accounts payable department was doing their end of the transaction. We would do, even though we had some electronic transaction capabilities with our legacy system, AP was still processing paper invoices. So there was definitely a breakdown there in the process.
So just before we maybe go on to the next slide, I'd be curious to know what was the kind of, you talked about the kind of broken chain within purchase to pay. How were procurement and finance actually aligned? To what degree, or to what degree were they not aligned?
Well, they were aligned that we were both using at the time the same legacy system. However, we were moving on to electronic purchase orders. We had kind of moved forward to the next step, and we were doing some more electronic transactions. However, accounts payable, because they were under a different division and really we didn't have as much control over their budget or their processes, they kind of wanted to stay with their current process, which was receiving the paper invoice, scanning it in, matching it to the receivables, and it was, the process just wasn't linked up at all. There would be times where they wouldn't have, they would receive paper invoices that didn't have purchase order numbers on them. They would receive invoices without the right pricing or didn't have the right line item on it because they weren't linked with what we were doing. And so it was almost like two different processes, and yet they had to come together in order for us to, we use a three-way match here at CONSOL, in order to complete the three-way match. And of course that was leading to a lot of issues as far as not being able to match invoices the first time through, and a lot of going back and manually researching, okay, what was the purchase order number supposed to be on this invoice? What line item does this this cost belong to on that purchase order? It was just a very different number of issues and problems that we had with that.
Okay, and I'm sure a lot of what you're saying now resonates with a lot of people on the line right now. So let's focus on your the kind of the maturity model that we've got on the screen now, and maybe just walk us through kind of where you were, and then begin to touch on where you wanted to get to.
Sure. We like to use this model just to show how we've advanced and where we're at along the chain. And obviously, when we started out, we weren't in level 0, I mean, or even level 1. We were probably somewhere around maybe level 1, but between 1 and 2 when we started out. And since then, I would say with all the changes we've made, we're probably now sitting at the upper end of level 4, and it's probably between level 4 and level 5. We're continuously improving. Yes, we're definitely doing that, but I guess in essence, continuously improving means that you're never really quite at the pinnacle, because there's always somewhere else to go, other improvements to be made.
Good. That diagram is very, very useful. So let's just dwell a little bit more on where you really did want to go in terms of your vision and your goals. Just walk us through, if you will, around things like where you wanted to get to in terms of the kind of the requirements and the criteria that were of real importance to you.
Yes, when we looked at the whole overview of what we were doing and what where we thought we could make improvements, we knew that there was what we pictured in our mind as to where we needed to be a best in class, or to definitely improve processes and cut costs. And obviously, one of the first things was we needed to find the value. We had to bring something to the table that provided something for both the supplier and the buyer's benefit. Because in the end, we need our suppliers to support us and to buy into what we're doing, because these changes are going to affect them in a positive way, hopefully, but also it's going to mean some changes in how they do business with us. So we had to show value on both the supplier and buyer side. We needed to lower the transactional duties. Like I said, there was a lot of manual processes involved in these transactions. There was as a result of that, there was a higher cost because of the mismatches and having to do things 2 and 3 times, or do research, or call people in the field and go back to to get the matches for these invoices. The costs were extremely high, so we wanted to get those lowered. We knew we had to go to a single system solution. We were having multiple systems that where it was just not the answer. It just added the burden to the whole process, having to understand each different system, and invoices would come in and they would have to be applied differently to the different systems. It was quite a mess, actually. We knew we wanted to go to an electronic process all the way through from procure to pay. We absolutely realized that when we looked at the numbers, and I'm sure a number of you folks have done the same thing, you saw that you could reduce your transaction cost tremendously if you can do an electronic process from for the entire cycle. We wanted to integrate the procure to pay process, which is a little bit of what I just spoke about. We didn't want to have us doing something partly electronic and then having AP doing a manual process, and then trying to put the 2 pieces together and connect them in our ERP system, or whatever system they happen to be working on at that time. Strategically focused, obviously, operational driven with sustainable and measurable savings. we know that we had to look at things more strategically. We wanted to be able to get away from the reaction-based types of transactions, and we wanted to head things off at the beginning, see if we could fix the problems on the front end. And operationally driven, obviously, looking at the operations and how we could do this more efficiently, and reduce the cost and drive cost out of that was very important. And of course, these savings had to be sustainable, and you had to have a way of measuring them. Are you really doing what you set out to do? Are you really reducing your invoice mismatches, or are you reducing your costs? So those were some of the things that we know we wanted to go for.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you were very clear in your kind of requirements documentation, in your business case build. Tell us a little bit about the solution that you actually went for and indeed implemented.
Yes, one of the things with any solution that you want to implement, and one thing that's really helped us from the beginning, is we put together a cross-functional team that had that reported to senior management. So we're able to take our case to senior management, and especially the controllers, because we wanted to make sure that the controllers understood what we were trying to accomplish, and they concurred with us that there was indeed a substantial savings to implement these processes. And so everything starts with you need to get the management's buy-in, because then that helps so much as far as putting these systems in place and driving them through the rest of the company. So one of the first things we did, we wanted to implement Habu's business network solution. Back in those days, I believe it was known as O2I, but this allowed us to put in place electronic order to invoicing process and tie everything together so that everything was linked. It allowed us to put in electronic catalogs, which we integrated. We're an SAP shop, that's our ERP, and these electronic catalogs actually integrated with the SAP MM module. And then being able to do a match and approve type of transaction with the catalog, or with the electronic catalogs and the prices. One of the things about the electronic catalogs that was helped too is they became the pricing. I guess I want to say that was basically the harbinger for any type of price dispute. The prices in the catalog drove everything, so that helped quite a bit as far as the matching process, because as long as they bought it out of the catalog, they knew that the pricing was accurate and current. Concurrently, we implemented SAP's SRM, and actually, the SRM implementation, because it tied into the Habu network, was considered as part of the ROI that we developed. Through the SRM module, we were doing electronic bidding and auctions. We did the shopping cart integration, again, with the Habu catalogs, like I'd mentioned. And currently, we're developing a punch-out to our contract catalogs. We've developed for our services contracts with pricing built into them that our suppliers, when they're building their invoices, will be able to punch out, pull in the contract pricing, and build their invoices. Again, just like the material catalogs, this allows them to have the correct and accurate pricing whenever the invoices come through. So we're, again, trying to head off the issues before they occur at the front end of the process, as opposed to waiting for the invoices to come in and then doing a back-end process of matching them. If we correct the price and make sure that the prices are correct up front and they're being pulled from our agreed-to pricing, that helped quite a bit as far as some of the mismatches we were experiencing that were a result of incorrect pricing being used.
Okay, George, maybe you can just share with us a little bit more about how many suppliers were in scope, and also what the kind of the ROI looked like for this particular program.
Oh, sure. We actually, the number I think you see on your screen is 628 suppliers. That has actually increased by maybe another 30 or 40 suppliers since this slide was put together. We have 100 material catalogs, and although on its face that may not seem like many, it covers about 100,000 items, and these are our primary suppliers, so we're getting the items that are ordered, most frequently and most commonly. We're also currently have a large project going on that we're gearing up for. We're going to load 700 more punch-out to supplier catalogs and the associated suppliers. These are service catalogs we're talking about, where the, as I was saying, the service suppliers will be able to punch out, pull in their service pricing, and build their invoices. And that's a large project that we're actually working on as I speak. We brought in our gas division, put them all under one system, brought them into our system, SAP and SRM. During that process, too, we acquired a large gas company called Dominion Exploration Production. That acquisition brought in quite a number of new suppliers and quite a number of new product lines. We had an ROI when we started the project that we wanted to get about $25 million in the 3-year period, and as a result of these processes, it actually occurred surprisingly and then pleasantly enough a lot less than 3 years. We were able to achieve our ROI, and we've exceeded it as the years have gone by quite a bit.
That sounds massively encouraging, and I'm sure it will be very encouraging for the viewers on the webinar today. Just walk us through the timelines that were associated with this program.
Oh, yeah, no problem. It started back actually in February of '07, and if you look at your chart there, you have a blue line. That's when we started loading the material suppliers. And then the red line is where we began services. We started out with the materials because it was a little simpler process. There weren't any service entry sheets to worry about. The materials, the pricing and structure was more standard or cut and dry, I should say, as opposed to services, which tend to be vary quite a bit depending on the type of service that you're contracting for. And so, again, it looks like on the chart we began loading the material suppliers around March of '07. We loaded our first group of services in March of '08. And as you can see, there are a number of steps on the services side where we did our initial load, and then we sort of waited because obviously, again, as services are complex, so we wanted to make sure that the services were going to go smoothly and run smoothly. Once we were comfortable, we not only added more services, we decided to bring our CNX gas division in. We had enough confidence by that time that the services would work the way we had felt they would work, that we brought in the CNX gas. And as you can see, again, we loaded a lot of the CNX gas vendors, a steep climb in the curve, and then we sort of slowed down a little bit after that, just continued to load suppliers from the coal side. And then we ended up acquiring Dominion in about 2010. Dominion E&P, like I said, brought to the table a number of new suppliers. And one of the things we did there that we wanted to, that by this time we were very comfortable. We saw that the system was working very well. And so at this time we decided that we were going to take Dominion, and when we did the Dominion acquisition, we actually were able to add quite a number of suppliers and quite a number of invoices at that point with very little increase in FTEs. We needed to put, I think we added 1 or 2 additional AP clerks in order to take on the Dominion acquisition, and we wouldn't have never been able to do that without putting these type of processes in place.
Okay, good. So that obviously illustrates the huge impact that electronic invoicing has on your productivity, so number of invoices processed per FTE. If you indeed only had to recruit 2 more people to manage the volumes that came through the acquisition. George, talk to us a little bit about the manual versus electronic that we can see on this slide.
Yes, this basically shows the transition going from the manual service entries and electronic service entries. And as you can see, the red represents the manual service entries that we were doing back in 2007, and the blue represents after we implemented the Habu process and the electronic service entries. And you can see where the lines intersect, and at that point, the manual service entries definitely began to taper off, and just as the Habu service entries continued to climb. And we peaked right around 6,100. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar, obviously, with the energy industry in the United States, we've been in a little bit of a lull, and you're seeing that represented here with the 2011-2012. But as you notice, the manual service entries are continuing to decrease, and we still have about an equivalent number of electronic service entries. Now, that will probably jump again once we've put on these additional 700 contracts that we're wanting to do. That will help quite a bit, and we'll have a larger separation between those two lines going forward from 2012 on.
Okay, George, you can see the slide here. Just spend a moment, if you will. We talked a bit about productivity. It's clear from this slide and clear from what you said that with the acquisition, your invoice volumes have gone up. So just talk to us a little bit more about the impact that that's had on your purchase-to-pay organization.
Oh, yes, and I touched on this a little bit earlier. As you can see, we started out with the colon affiliates only, and the number of invoices that were being processed, and then when we added CNX, it increased the volume substantially, but not nearly as much. It was about a 37% increase when we brought them on, but not nearly as much as when we acquired Dominion. And this is where we really saw some of the benefits of what we had been doing, in that we had a 50% increase in volume of invoices, and at that point we were able to take those additional invoices on with very little additional resources as far as personnel. And that was simply because by putting these processes in place, we were able to reduce the impact that had on our resources, manual resources, to do the invoice matching and that sort of thing.
Because you can see from the chart that we've got here that the volume that went through, that's now going through Habu, is obviously increasing considerably. And so again, just walk us through this chart.
This is one of my favorite charts here, because this kind of dramatically shows the change in volume between the AP invoices and the Habu invoices. As you can see, in 2008, when we took our first data reading here, by far a large percentage of manual invoices in the FTEs, which is the small number at the bottom. I know it's a little hard to read. It in the accounts payable was at that point around 13.16. And as time went on, as we added more and more suppliers and implemented the electronic invoices, you can see where the electronic invoices, which is the red portion, would increase, and at the same time the blue version, which represented the manual process, it decreased. And at the same time that this is going on, the volume of invoices continued to grow, continued to increase. But what's even more fascinating is if you look at the FTEs for the accounts payable staffing, that began, especially recently here where we had a big jump in the electronic invoices, to reduce substantially. And what we did is we took those personnel and reallocated them. This reduction happened through attrition, and we were able to take people and put them in different assignments or different areas in the accounts payable group, other than simply going through the reactionary process or the tactical process of matching the invoices. Now they could look more strategically at their processes as well and utilize them in more beneficial ways.
Okay, let's stop for a moment and just spend bit of time looking at a particular problem that I know that you had that the Hubble solution has really helped with, which is a major problem with the service work and compliance with contract pricing. Can you walk us through in detail, again, what the problem looked like and really what the solution has done to help you resolve that problem?
Oh, sure. As I spoke earlier, we were putting on our services group and using the services contracts. This is a little representation, a screenshot of what the one of our contract invoices currently will look like as we add these suppliers. One of the major problems we had, and this affected us in a couple areas. We established contracts with most of our service suppliers, which I'm sure you all do yourselves. And every time we would get audited, we would be cited because the pricing that was coming through on the invoices wasn't matching what was on the contracts. And mostly it was a manual process to match these up. And although they were being spot checked by some people in the field and in the supply chain department, there was such a huge volume we weren't able to catch all of them. And we were having people in the field essentially giving the suppliers a more or less a field promotion by the supplier would approach the project engineer and say, hey, look, I ran into some rough ground here. I need $5 more an hour for this, using this equipment. And the field engineer would say, oh, okay, fine. In the meantime, we have a contract at a certain rate and there's processes in place. So that created an issue just there in being in compliance. But the other side of the coin was that then you did not have a match in accounts payable because your receipts you're receiving, which was based on your contract pricing, was at one price and the invoice was coming in at another. So again, you would have the invoice be held up, and then somebody would have to go out and research what happened, and generally that involved calling the people in the field. So what we've done is we've put the Hubble process in place where the suppliers will now punch out to the contract catalog, and there will be a format that they use. They'll build the invoice on Hubble, and when we create a purchase order that references that particular contract, the buyer has a way of marking that purchase order so that that will require the supplier to have to punch out, go to their electronic catalog, which will have all of the prices for their contract set aside in there, and they can grab it and pull it into a shopping cart, assuring that the match will be right every time. The only thing they would be putting in there is their, the hours that they worked for each of the different divisions, and you can see how that example there is a somewhat good example, which shows you have several different labor rates. You'll have the plant operator. Our sourcing people, our contract buyers, have done a very good job of detailing all the various costs within that contract. This way, and we've already seen it working with the suppliers that we have on, we have a very accurate match. The supplier loves it because the supplier doesn't have to have their invoice held up, and it actually makes it easier for them. They know what the rates are. They just punch out. It's like it would be like building a shopping cart in Amazon or such as that. So this is we're very excited about this, and like I said, we have several contractors already on. They've been on it for a while. It's working great, and we're, like I said, we have a big push on putting the rest of our contractors into this process. But this has helped in a lot of different ways, from the supplier end to our compliance to our matching, and yeah, we're very excited about it.
Okay, just before we move to the kind of the closing part of this story, George, maybe as well, if you can just talk about another recent endeavour that you've been working on that I know you're excited about too, which is the match and approve within the Hubble platform.
Sure. Again, like I had said earlier, the idea is to be proactive, to try to stop the errors and the mismatches before they occur. Try to get to them at the front end of the transaction if you can. One of the issues we were having is the invoices were coming in, and again, they may not have the right price, they may not have correct unit of measure. As you know, there's a myriad of various things that could go wrong. Unfortunately, under the old system, they were coming in and posting to our back-end system, which was our SAP ERP. Once they posted and we realized the mistake after the fact, then we had to back that invoice out, and that was a very, very cumbersome process because those of you that are using ERPs understand that everything is tied together. If anybody had done any receiving or anything like that against that particular invoice, or it just added to the complication, and we were getting constant complaints from our AP people saying, look, you know, these backing out these invoices killing us. When we took on the gas division, that amplified it, because in gas we have multiple gas wells that are associated with the location, and so often our suppliers would bill and they would accidentally bill one well when they should have been billing another. And this is common with the gas industry. And unfortunately, you know, the invoice would get processed through, go into the SAP system, and then the engineer would come out and say, oh, by the way, you know, that we realize that invoice belongs with well number 3, not well number 2. And each of our wells are their own cost center. So again, we had to go and back this out. Back out the invoice, causing a lot of havoc. This process, the buyer dashboard, we refer to it as, allows the suppliers to invoice and attach their backup and all their documents or their time, their supporting invoices, anything like that that has to do with the billing, submitted on the buyer dashboard. At that point, before it's ever passed on into the back-end system, the requisitioner engineer that's approving these can look at those prices, and if there is an error there, they will see it prior to letting it flow into our system, and they can reject it there, send it back to the supplier with a note or instruction saying, look, you know, you're billing the wrong well. You need to put the correct well number on, or these aren't the prices that we had agreed to, or whatever it might be. And that gives the supplier a chance then to correct the invoice and rebill it, you know, correctly, so that when it finally does go through into our system, you know, there's no issues, and it flows very well. But it saved a lot of time on the, you know, the backside, doing what we refer to them as backouts, because they're such a complex issue, and they can be very timely to take care of. And also there was a number of other you know, things that this brought to the table. It provided an auditable dispute resolution for communicating, you know, invoice issues by being able to send this information back to the supplier and saying, look, you know, I'm rejecting this because you know, this was a problem or that was a problem. And it goes, and it can be done fairly quickly before it goes into the system, and you know, it's, by the time it's backed out and realized after it's entered our SAP system, it's just taking up all that much more time. And then it provides for multiple release capabilities for a collective service entry or invoice approval. And that has made things quite nice for the people in the field that want to have that type of capability.
Okay, George, there were obviously some very, very clear benefits that came from, or are indeed coming from, using this solution. So just before we go into a poll, because obviously one of the benefits is the 96% match rate, so I'm going to run a poll on that. But maybe just very, very briefly, maybe just take one or two really kind of key benefits from this slide and just touch on them briefly, if you would, before we go into the poll.
Oh, sure. You know, we developed the key metrics for the ROI and performance measurement, and as I said, we did this through a team, a cross-functional team, because when we came up with these metrics, we wanted everybody to agree, you know, this is how we're going to develop our ROI, and we wanted them to understand that, you know, these were real numbers based on our research. And so if they were part of the research and understood the process, you know, getting buy-in made it that much better. And we actually went through and looked at the, developed the cost and everything that we needed to do, for a material purchase order and a service purchase order. And of course, with management, we looked at best in class, and they went below that. So they made it a challenge for us. They says, well, here's, I see what you're saying, but I really think it should be a little bit less than that. So essentially they created a conservative number for us to use to achieve the ROI. But the important part was that they all agreed. We had our controllers department was in agreement. We had the supply chain department was working with it, operations, and the cross-functional team agreed, and the oversight committee also, saw how we were measuring this. They agreed too. So we looked at the different POs. We looked at the automating the POs, what that did for us, the catalog ties and updates, how they played into the metrics so that we could measure, how much they were being utilized, because when they were utilized, obviously that was creating an efficiency, creating the flow of the materials through the system quicker and easier with less, less interruption. Blocked invoice reduction was obviously a huge one, and that goes back to the mismatch of the invoices. When they weren't matching, then we referred to them as being blocked, and that required somebody to manually go out there and deal with that so that they could find out why that invoice was blocked and to resolve it, and that very timely, time-consuming. And when you're dealing with the volume of invoices that companies deal with, like ourselves, that was quite expensive for us to be doing that. Improved.
Okay, good. I'm going to have to stop you there just because we're going to be a little bit short on time. But what we're going to do now is we're just going to move to a poll, because obviously one of the clear benefits was around your first-time match rate. So I'm just going to launch this poll, which is coming up now on your screens, and then just compare that with the journey that you had as far as your first-time match rate was concerned. So, ladies and gentlemen, on your screen now, what is your first-time match rate today? Apologies, that's just if. It should say it is. What is your first-time match rate today? Is it less than 50%, 51 to 65%, 66 to 80%, 81 to 90%, or 91% or more? So just remember what we were talking about, that if you're around the 95, 94, 95, 96%, you're most definitely in the top performing world-class bracket. So share that information with us if you will. We're only at 46% of you having voted. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look. On your screens now, you can see coming up. So interesting results, 43% of you at a first-time match rate of less than 50%, and 0 over 91% or more, 23% between 81 and 90. So your closing points, if you will, George, just before we hand back to Rinus for a summary. Talk us through where you're at right now with your first-time match rate.
Right now, as we'd said, we actually have had a market improvement. This graph shows that since we implemented our e-invoicing processes, we have reached a 96% match rate, which has been great, and that's one of the reasons we were able to achieve the type of FTEs that we have so far. The invoice volume is going up, and the match rate has stayed steady even as the as the invoice volume has increased, and we're hoping to do better if we can. 96%, as you pointed out, is really terrific, but when you're processing close to 400,000 invoices a year, that 4% creates still quite a bit of work for somebody out in the field and for our people. So we're putting these services on. We're hoping that's going to improve things even more as we get more and more of our service suppliers on. And who knows? Maybe we can someday say we're at 100%. But right now, we're very happy and pleased with where we're at. AP is happy with us. Our suppliers are tickled. They're getting paid on time, and They're having less hassles calling in and arguing with somebody in our accounts payable group. So it's been great, and that's where we're at, and hopefully we'll remain there and improve on that as we implement some of these other changes.
George, thank you so much indeed for that fascinating story and sharing your experience with us. Now I'd like to hand over to Rinus for a summary, please.
Great. Thank you, Susie, and thank you, George. You know, it's really nice to hear a company like CONSOL that has achieved best-in-class status on some of these metrics and still have that 100% first-time match goal. That's phenomenal to continue on that path. So how are these results achieved? So you heard George talk about getting the maximum percentage of spend on catalogs and on contracts. So that means goods and services, right? So traditionally, folks have thought about catalogs as being only applicable to materials, but they're also, as George showed, very applicable for rates and that blend of both goods and services. So number two, obviously, when you have a high percentage of purchase orders and suppliers can then go ahead and simply flip those into invoices, that also increases the accuracy of that first-time match. The third point, the rules-based. We'll cover a bit what that means, and then as we said at the beginning, using the same B2B network, getting those suppliers on board electronically for both procurement and invoicing is how these results are achieved. So on the catalogs, you see a couple of industry stats here. Typically it's 6 to 12% savings for every additional piece of currency you bring under management, meaning that it's now compliance spend versus maverick. And then the mass enablement of suppliers is also key. What we see down below is the concept of a multi-supplier catalog, right? So you can get your requisitioners everything from goods and services that they're approved to buy on their desktop. Honeywell on the right-hand side here, what they did is put 400 catalogs up very quickly, both goods and services, to get to that very usable and on-contract spend method. Moving on to AP automation and how business networks help there. George had mentioned the electronic invoice presentment, but also very importantly, what I want to highlight is it's not about getting just bad invoices in electronically. It's about getting accurate invoices in, and that is the only way to get to these matches. So the accuracy, it's a combination of rules. For example, what you can do is define that certain invoices maybe the supplier can't present unless a receipt has occurred, or the supplier gets an error message immediately upon presentment if the tolerance has been eclipsed. So you're pushing that error further upstream to the source. Going even further upstream, George had mentioned suppliers being able to invoice directly against catalogs and contracts. So you're getting that compliance further upstream. And then, up front from that even, getting your requisitioners to buy directly off of contracts and catalogs. So there's catalog-based spend, there's PO-based spend, and there's rules that enable this accuracy. For the sake of time, let's go ahead and move over to the last piece we had talked about, which is collaboration and how that impacts business today. So these networks today are not just transactional, as they had started back in the late 90s. What we see now is also community being added. So what Habu has done in our business network is added community on top of the real commerce that is happening there. So from a community standpoint, for buyers, what you see is being able to search, connect, and collaborate with qualified suppliers. You see here a snapshot on the screen of both qualitative and quantitative ratings on sellers. So you can see certifications, you can see peer reviews and ratings on different categories, volumes on a network, so additional data points to help you vet and validate qualified suppliers. Moving on finally to the social commerce for sellers. What does it mean from that standpoint? So when you're on a network, back in the late 90s, these networks were one-sided. George had also mentioned that it's important to have value for both buyers and sellers, right, or else these ecosystems don't grow and don't continue to enhance value. So for sellers, our fundamental belief is that they shouldn't be taxed. Sellers shouldn't have to pay a fee in order to participate. So just like a LinkedIn business model, it's free to join, free to set up a profile, free to enhance it. Then when you get to the point of differentiating, why not leverage the spot where actual commerce is happening, a network, to go ahead and create context-sensitive advertising and public catalogs. So the value point for sellers is also clear in this model. So with that, I will turn it back to Susie.
Rinus and George, many thanks indeed. We have a lot of questions, so let's start with them. I'll go back to George, if I may. What were the kind of the top 2, maximum 3 actions that you think you took to get to the 96%? If you were going to boil it down to 2 or 3 critical things that happened, what would those be?
Number 1 is buy-in, both from the executive management and from your suppliers. You have to show the value to the suppliers. Number 2, obviously, is you have to have a very good method, of getting your suppliers onboarded and a way of supporting those suppliers as they go through the process. It was a large, a big change, business process change for these suppliers, and so we had a team that helped them through the process, as well as utilizing Habu's people. Those 2 items there, having the buy-in and supporting your suppliers through this process.
Okay, George, just to follow on to that, another question was how difficult was it to, and the viewer has used the word enforce, so there could be a whole debate around that word in itself, but how difficult was it, or how easy was it to have the vendors cooperate?
Actually, it was easier than I thought. We were concerned. Our business is centered in the United States in the Appalachian coal fields, and the technology curve is lacking a little bit here. So we were ready for an issue, but I think once we showed them the benefits, and once the supplier got on and tried it, and knowing that we were there to support them, that Habu was there to support them, it actually was not as difficult as I had thought it was, and we were probably loading vendors in one of the most difficult areas, I would think, as far as being conservative, in their processes.
Okay, a viewer has also asked, does the electronic service entry mean the use of ERS? I think in your case, evaluated receipt settlement or self-billing. In this case, it's pure a kind of invoice sent from the supplier to the buyer. Is that correct, George? Rather than ERS.
Yes, we have a couple ERS vendors, but yes, the brief answer would be that is correct.
Okay. Now, again, there's a lot of interest in the supplier onboarding experience. Who drove the experience? Who drove it? And was it you? Was it Habu? Just talk to us a little bit about that, if you would.
It was a team effort, but one of the things we did right off the bat is we held a couple supplier summits with our top suppliers. We brought them in and had a half-day meeting with executives from CONSOL and people from Habu to talk about the process and the business process changes that were coming. And Habu was there to show them what they would be seeing and to let them know they were there to support them. Our upper management was there to let them understand that this was an important process for CONSOL and that we appreciated their participating in it. So that's how we kicked it off. So it was a partnership.
Okay. Okay, good. Question for you, please, Rinus. So how is SAP positioning their relationship with Habu now that they have acquired Ariba? SAP is still as strong.
Your voice cut out a bit, Susie, but on the question of how SAP is positioning their relationship, SAP is selling their network, the Ariba network. Habu is an open network. We have still certified alliances with SAP. We have a joint go-to-market with Microsoft, and we'll have others in the very near future as well. We're the largest open B2B network in the industry, and continue that certification with SAP. So from our standpoint, this just brings much higher visibility of the network value proposition to the industry, and are very excited at the future.
the hello, Renus, did you finish your answer there? I just lost
Susie, not sure if it was my phone or yours, but your voice was mute, so I apologize. If you could repeat, please.
Okay, good. Well, thank you for that. That's been very interesting. And for both of you, actually, well, let's start with you, Renus. There's obviously a strong link to SAP within the CONSOL case study. What about other solutions? What about other ERPs? Renus, if you could take that one.
Yeah, absolutely. So Hubwoo's business network works on an open integration framework. So at the core, the messages are XML. We have mappings for all the major ERP solutions out there. Certified with all the major ERP solutions. And you saw, in addition to our SAP certification, we just announced recently a global Microsoft go-to-market alliance. So very much open to a heterogeneous mix. Many of our customers integrate to several different ERP systems as they go through their journey to consolidate to one ERP. Okay, that's great. I'm afraid we are out of time. In fact, we're slightly over time. There have been a number of questions on KPIs and what KPIs should be used within purchase to pay. Can I recommend that you go on to sharedserviceslink.com and search for our top 10 KPIs in purchase to pay and download that tool. That will be very interesting for you. I'd just like to say thank you very much to Renus Stridham and to George Smith from CONSOL. If you would a little bit more about Hubwoo, then please do go on to sharedserviceslink.com. I had the pleasure of interviewing the CEO, Greg Mark, very recently, and you can listen to the 4-part series of that, which is being aired in April. And also we're delighted to have Hubwoo at our Source to Settle as a Service event that's taking place in London in June. So make sure that you register for that. There are some great discounts if you register early for that. And do make sure that you join us next time for our next webinar, which is taking place on the 30th of April. In the time being, have a great purchase to pay experience and see you next time. Thank you very much indeed, and goodbye.